At 38 years old, I looked like a man 20 years older. My hands were rough from work. My back hurt every morning. My savings account was nearly empty. And the woman I loved was slowly falling in love with someone else. The worst part? I didn't even realize it until it was too late. When we first met, neither of us had much. We were two young people trying to survive. No rich parents, no trust funds, no shortcuts. Just dreams. The kind of dreams people laugh at when you're broke. We rented a tiny apartment above an old convenience store. The walls were thin. The air conditioner barely worked. The kitchen was so small that only one person could stand in it at a time. But we were happy. At least I thought we were. Back then, I would wake up before sunrise. I'd leave for work while she was still asleep. Then I'd come home exhausted long after dark. Sometimes 14 hours later. Sometimes 16. I wasn't building wealth. I was building survival. Every paycheck had a destination before it even arrived. Rent. Utilities. Insurance. Food. Gas. Student loans. There was never enough left over. But I kept pushing. Because every time I thought about quitting, I looked at her. And suddenly the struggle felt worth it. She had dreams. Big dreams. She wanted a better career. A better home. A better future. And I wanted to help her get there. So I sacrificed. Year after year. I worked weekends. I skipped vacations. I missed birthdays. I missed family gatherings. I missed holidays. Not because I didn't care, because I cared too much. I believed suffering now would create happiness later. When her student loans became overwhelming, I used nearly all my savings to help pay them down. When she wanted additional certifications for her career, I paid for them. When her car broke down, I postponed replacing my own vehicle and bought her another one instead. Every decision I made had the same question behind it. What would help us build a better future? For a long time she appreciated it, or at least she seemed to. Then things started changing. Slowly, almost invisibly. At first it was social media. She spent more and more time scrolling. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, expensive restaurants, million-dollar homes, perfect couples, perfect lives, perfect lies. Every night she would stare at her phone. Every night she became a little less satisfied with our reality. I noticed it, but I thought it was temporary. Everyone goes through phases. Everyone compares themselves to others sometimes. I didn't know that comparison was quietly poisoning our marriage. The first time she mentioned him, I didn't think much of it. He got promoted again, she said during dinner. I nodded. Good for him. She smiled. He drives a new Mercedes now. I shrugged. That's nice. She kept talking. For some reason. Long after the conversation should have ended. How confident he was. How successful he looked. How everyone respected him. How charismatic he seemed. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, because I didn't realize I was listening to the beginning of the end. The man she was talking about wasn't just a coworker. He was my rival. The same rival who had spent years competing against me professionally. The same rival who mocked people behind their backs. The same rival who measured human value by money. The same rival who never missed an opportunity to remind others how successful he thought he was. I never liked him. And the feeling was mutual. Every promotion became a competition. Every project became a battle. Every achievement became something he needed to outshine. But unlike him, I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to provide for my family. That difference mattered. At least I thought it did. Months passed. Then I started noticing strange things. The late nights. The secret smiles. The sudden phone notifications. The way she turned her screen away when I entered the room. The way she seemed emotionally distant. I told myself I was imagining it, because the alternative was too painful. One evening I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. I walked into the living room. She was smiling at her phone, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The moment she noticed me, her expression changed. She locked the screen immediately, too quickly. My stomach dropped. What are you looking at? I asked. Nothing. The answer came instantly. Too instantly. The conversation ended there, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, doubt entered my mind. Over the next several weeks, the evidence kept growing. Hidden messages. Deleted conversations. Unexplained absences. Late meetings that seemed to happen every night. Phone calls taken outside. And excuses. So many excuses. Yet I still wanted to believe her. Because when you spent 12 years loving someone, your heart becomes the last thing willing to accept reality. Then came the night everything collapsed. I had finished work early. I decided to surprise her. I bought her favorite dinner. I even stopped to pick up flowers. For the first time in months, I was excited. I imagined us reconnecting, talking, laughing, remembering who we used to be. Instead, I walked into silence. The house was empty. Her car wasn't there. I called. No answer. I texted. Nothing. Hours passed. Then my phone rang. It wasn't her. It was a co-worker. Someone who knew both of us. Someone whose voice sounded nervous. There's something you need to see. My heart started pounding. Minutes later, a photo appeared on my screen. I stared at it, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to move. There they were. My wife and my rival, sitting together, holding hands, looking at each other the way two people look at each other when they believe nobody is watching. The flowers slipped from my hand. The food hit the floor, and 12 years of trust shattered in a single moment. I confronted her the next morning. There was no point pretending anymore. The evidence was undeniable. At first she denied it. Then she minimized it. Then she justified it. And finally, she stopped apologizing. That was the moment that hurt the most. Not the affair, not the lies, not the betrayal. The absence of remorse. The woman I loved looked directly into my eyes and said words I will never forget. Maybe I chose the wrong man. The room became silent. I felt something inside me break. Not my heart. Something deeper. My belief that love alone could save a marriage. A week later, she moved out. 2 months later, she filed for divorce. 6 months later, she married him. The entire process felt unreal, as if I were watching someone else's life collapse instead of my own. Friends picked sides. Some disappeared completely. Others acted like I should simply move on, as if 12 years could be erased with a motivational quote. Every day became a battle. Every night became worse. The house felt empty. The future felt empty. I felt empty. Then came the photographs, the social media posts, the luxury vacations, the expensive restaurants, the smiling faces, the perfect marriage. She looked happier than I had ever seen her, and I hated myself for noticing, because while they were celebrating their new beginning, I was sitting alone, trying to understand where mine had gone. One rainy evening, nearly a year after the divorce began, I carried the last box into a small apartment on the edge of town. The place was tiny, old, quiet, nothing like the home we once shared. I sat on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, surrounded by silence, surrounded by the ruins of the life I had spent 12 years building. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, tears rolled down my face. For the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea what came next. And somewhere across the city, my ex-wife and the man she had chosen over me were beginning the life they believed would last forever. The first year after the divorce nearly destroyed me. Not because I lost money, not because I lost the house, not because I lost the marriage, because I lost myself. Every morning started the same way. I would wake up and forget for a few seconds. Then reality would hit. The empty apartment, the silence, the absence of the person I had spent over a decade loving. The pain never arrived gradually. It arrived all at once, like a truck hitting me every single day. I stopped sleeping properly. Some nights I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. Other nights I would fall asleep from exhaustion only to wake up 2 hours later. My mind became a prison. Every memory replayed endlessly. Every argument, every lie, every warning sign I ignored. Most painful of all was the question that haunted me. What was wrong with me? When someone you love leaves you for another person, your mind immediately becomes your enemy. Maybe I wasn't successful enough. Maybe I wasn't attractive enough. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. That thought followed me everywhere. At work. At home. In the grocery store. At the gas station. Everywhere. The divorce had ended legally, but emotionally, I was still trapped inside it. I stopped answering phone calls. I stopped seeing friends. I stopped caring about things that once mattered. The world kept moving. I didn't. Months passed. Then something happened that made everything worse. I saw a picture online. My ex-wife and my former rival standing on a yacht. Karma. Both smiling, both dressed in designer clothes. Champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Living our best life." I stared at the image for nearly 10 minutes. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't look away. While I was struggling to pay bills, they seemed to be living a dream. While I was rebuilding from nothing, they appeared to be winning. That picture crushed me. For days afterward, I could barely focus. The worst part was knowing that people were watching. People who knew our story. People who knew I had been left behind. People who probably looked at that photo and thought the same thing. He lost. For a while, I believed it too. Then came another blow. The company announced leadership changes. Guess who received another promotion? My former rival. The man who had taken my wife. The man who constantly mocked me. The man who seemed to win every battle. Everyone congratulated him. Everyone praised him. Everyone admired him. Meanwhile, I sat at my desk pretending I didn't care. But inside, I was breaking apart. That evening, I drove home in silence. Rain hammered against the windshield. Traffic crawled. The city lights blurred together. And for the first time in my life, I genuinely wondered if my future would ever improve. I parked outside my apartment, but I didn't get out. I sat there for nearly an hour, thinking, questioning, hurting. I wasn't considering anything dangerous, but I was exhausted. Exhausted from losing. Exhausted from hurting. Exhausted from watching people who betrayed me seem rewarded for it. Then something happened. Something small. Something most people would never remember. But it changed my life. I looked across the parking lot. An elderly janitor was finishing his shift. He moved slowly. His uniform was worn. His truck was older than mine. Yet he looked peaceful. Genuinely peaceful. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But he looked content. And suddenly a thought entered my mind. Maybe success wasn't what I thought it was. Maybe my entire life had become focused on comparing my chapter 1 to someone else's. Chapter 20. Maybe I was measuring myself against appearances. The same mistake that had destroyed my marriage. That realization didn't heal me, but it started something. The next morning, I made a decision. I stopped following my ex-wife online. I stopped checking her photos. I stopped monitoring her life. I stopped giving them free space inside my head. Then I made another decision. Every hour I spent thinking about them would become an hour spent improving myself. At first it wasn't dramatic. No movie montage. No overnight transformation. Just small actions. Painfully small actions. I started reading again. One book became 2. 2 became 10. Business. Leadership. Psychology. Finance. Personal development. Every evening after work I studied. When I felt like quitting, I studied. When I felt lonely, I studied. When I felt angry, I studied. The pain became fuel. Slowly, my thinking began changing. Then I joined a local business seminar. I felt completely out of place. Most people there seemed more successful than me, but I kept showing up, week after week, month after month. Eventually, I met mentors. People who had failed before succeeding. People who understood setbacks. People who taught me lessons no classroom ever could. One mentor told me something I never forgot. Stop asking why this happened to you. Start asking what this can teach you. That sentence stayed with me. For months, maybe years. Because deep down I knew it was true. I couldn't change the divorce. I couldn't change the betrayal. I couldn't change the past. But I could change who I became because of it. So I kept working. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. My confidence slowly returned. Not because of money, because of progress. Then another opportunity appeared. A small consulting project. Nothing impressive. Most people would have ignored it. I didn't. I worked harder on that project than anyone expected. The client noticed. Then another client arrived. Then another. Then another. Suddenly the side income became significant. Not life-changing, but meaningful. For the first time in years I felt hopeful. Meanwhile, rumors about my ex-wife occasionally reached me. Luxury vacations. Luxury purchases. Luxury lifestyle. None of it bothered me anymore. At least not as much. Because something surprising had happened. I had become too busy building my future to obsess over theirs. One evening I was reviewing financial reports at my kitchen table. The same tiny apartment, the same old furniture, but a completely different man. I looked around the room. There were still challenges, still risks. still uncertainty. But there was also something that hadn't existed in a long time: belief. For the first time since the divorce, I genuinely believed my life could become something greater than it had ever been before. Not because of luck. Not because someone rescued me. Because I earned it. Then my phone rang. It was one of my newest clients. The biggest client I had ever worked with. I answered. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. But when it ended, I sat perfectly still, trying to process what I had just heard. The contract they offered was worth more money than I had earned during several years at my regular job. My hands actually started shaking. Not from fear, from disbelief. The breakthrough had finally arrived. After years of humiliation, years of loneliness, years of rebuilding, the first major door had opened, and I was finally ready to walk through it. The breakthrough changed everything. Not overnight. Not in the dramatic way people imagine success happens. But for the first time in years, the direction of my life had completely shifted. The consulting contract became 2 contracts. 2 became 5. 5 became more work than I could handle alone. Within 18 months, I hired my first employee. 6 months later, I hired another, then another. For years, I had watched opportunities pass me by. Now opportunities were finding me. I worked harder than ever, but this time the effort felt different. I wasn't fighting to survive anymore. I was building systems, building relationships, building a future. Most importantly, I was building confidence. The kind of confidence that doesn't come from money, the kind that comes from overcoming pain. 3 years after the divorce, I left my corporate job. It was one of the most terrifying decisions of my life. My hands actually shook when I submitted my resignation, but I knew staying would mean living in fear. Leaving meant betting on myself. And for the first time, I was willing to do that. The company continued growing. Clients referred other clients. Projects became larger. Revenue increased. My team expanded. Every year brought another level of progress. Then one afternoon I stood in the lobby of our newly purchased headquarters. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Modern design. Dozens of employees moving through the building. The company logo displayed behind the reception desk. For a moment I simply stood there, remembering the tiny apartment, remembering the sleepless nights, remembering the evenings when I questioned whether life would ever improve. I wasn't grateful because I had become successful. I was grateful because I hadn't quit. Success was merely the result. Persistence was the victory. Meanwhile, life had begun moving in a very different direction for my ex-wife and the man she chose. At first, nobody noticed. From the outside, everything still looked perfect. The vacations continued. The luxury photos continued. The expensive lifestyle continued. But appearances can hide a lot of problems, especially when people become addicted to looking successful. One evening I attended a business networking event. A former coworker approached me. We exchanged small talk. Then he mentioned something unexpected. "You heard about your old rival?" I hadn't. And honestly, I hadn't thought much about him in years. The coworker lowered his voice. "He made some bad investments." I listened quietly. Apparently, several business ventures had failed. Millions had been borrowed. Promises had been made. Returns never materialized. The losses were substantial. I wasn't happy to hear it, but I wasn't surprised either. The man had always confused confidence with competence. As months passed, more rumors appeared. Loans, debt, cash flow problems, legal disputes, investors demanding answers, employees leaving. The cracks were spreading. Still, they continued pretending everything was fine. Luxury has a way of becoming a prison. Once people build their identity around appearances, they become terrified of telling the truth. Then came the lawsuits. Several business partners accused him of misrepresentation. One case became 2. 2 became 4. Suddenly his name was appearing in places he never wanted it to appear. And unlike social media, court records couldn't be filtered. The pressure became enormous. According to people who knew them, the marriage began changing. Arguments increased. Trust disappeared. Financial stress entered every conversation. The same couple who once looked perfect online now spent most evenings blaming each other. My ex-wife reportedly discovered that many of the things she admired, most had been financed through debt. The expensive lifestyle wasn't built on stability. It was built on leverage, on appearances, on risk. And eventually the bill arrived. A few months later, another former coworker reached out. This time the news was even worse. The rival's largest business had officially collapsed. Investors withdrew. Contracts disappeared. Several accounts were frozen. Revenue dried up almost overnight. The empire he spent years showing off turned out to be much smaller than everyone believed, including my ex-wife. Especially my ex-wife. For years she had compared my quiet stability to his flashy success. Now she was discovering the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth. One lasts. The other eventually expires. As the financial pressure increased, their lifestyle unraveled. The luxury vehicles disappeared first. Then came the vacation home. Then several investments were liquidated. Friends who once surrounded them suddenly became difficult to find. Apparently, success attracts attention. Failure reveals who actually cares. The marriage continued deteriorating. The blame intensified. The arguments became public. People who knew them began talking. The couple who once seemed unstoppable now appeared exhausted, defeated. Karma, angry, broken. One afternoon I received an email from someone I recognized immediately. My ex-wife. The first message in years. I stared at the sender's name. Surprised. Curious. But not emotional. That surprised me most. There had been a time when simply seeing her name would ruin my entire week. Now it felt like reading the name of someone from another chapter of life. I opened the message. It was short, polite, awkward. She said she hoped I was doing well. She mentioned hearing about my company's success. Then she asked if we could talk sometime. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. I simply wasn't ready. A few weeks later I learned why she had reached out. The situation was worse than anyone realized. Their house had entered foreclosure. Several creditors were pursuing repayment. The rivals' remaining ventures were collapsing. The financial damage had become catastrophic. Everything they spent years building was disappearing, piece by piece. One evening, after finishing a board meeting, I looked out from my office window across the city skyline. The sun was setting. The streets below were filled with people rushing home. For a moment I reflected on how strange life could be. Years earlier I had been the broken one. The abandoned one. The man sitting alone in a tiny apartment wondering how to survive. Now I stood at the top floor of a thriving company, while the people who once seemed to have everything were watching their world collapse. But something unexpected happened. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt perspective. Because pain had taught me something valuable. Success doesn't protect people from consequences. Choices do. And the choices they made years ago were finally catching up with them. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, the final blow arrived. Their home was officially taken. Their remaining assets were nearly gone. And for the first time since the divorce, they had nowhere left to turn, except one place. Me. The first time they came looking for me, I wasn't there. According to my receptionist, they arrived just after 9 in the morning. My ex-wife. And the man she chose over me. The same man she once believed was everything I could never be. The same man who had spent years mocking me. The same man who had taken pride in winning. Now they were sitting in the lobby of my headquarters, waiting. My receptionist later told me they looked nervous, exhausted, different. Life had clearly been unkind to them. When I arrived that afternoon, they were gone. But they returned the next day, and the day after that. Eventually my assistant entered my office. They're back. I looked up from my desk. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. Send them up. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. The room became silent. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We simply looked at each other. Years of history standing in one room. My ex-wife looked older. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly was gone. The man beside her barely resembled the rival I remembered. His expensive suits were gone. His posture had changed. His eyes looked tired. Defeated. Karma. The arrogance that once filled every room had disappeared completely. I stood and greeted them politely. Not warmly. Not coldly. Professionally. The rival swallowed hard. Then something happened that I never expected. He lowered his head. The man who once mocked me couldn't even maintain eye contact. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, my ex-wife broke the silence. Thank you for seeing us. I nodded. Then we sat. The conversation started awkwardly. Small talk. Questions about business. Questions about life. Questions nobody actually cared about. Everyone knew why they were there. Eventually the rival took a deep breath. I'll be honest. His voice shook slightly. We need help. There it was. The reason they had come. The reason they kept returning. The reason they had searched for me after years of silence. The rival explained everything. The failed investments. The lawsuits. The debt. The foreclosure. The creditors. The businesses that collapsed. The partners who disappeared. The friends who vanished. Everything. I listened quietly. No interruptions. No judgment. No satisfaction. When he finished speaking, the room became silent again. Then my ex-wife began speaking. At first her voice was steady. Then it started breaking. Tears filled her eyes. For years I'd imagined this moment. Imagined what I would say. Imagined how I would react. But reality felt very different. She looked at me and finally said the words she had probably been carrying for years. I was wrong. The room became completely still. I spent years blaming you for things that were never your fault. A tear rolled down her cheek. You sacrificed everything for us. Another tear followed, and I didn't appreciate any of it. I said nothing. She continued. I thought success looked like expensive cars. I thought confidence looked like attention. I thought happiness looked like what people posted online. She shook her head. But I was wrong. Her voice cracked. You were the best man I ever had in my life. For a moment nobody moved. The rivals stared at the floor. My ex-wife wiped away tears, and I simply listened. Years earlier those words would have meant everything to me. Now they felt like an apology arriving long after the damage had been done. Finally the rival spoke again. I treated you badly. His voice was barely above a whisper. I was arrogant. I thought winning meant taking what belonged to someone else. He paused, then lowered his head further, and I paid for it. The room fell silent. I looked at both of them, not as enemies, not as villains, just people. Broken people, people living with the consequences of their decisions. Then my ex-wife asked the question they had both come to ask. Can you help us? I leaned back in my chair. The city skyline stretched behind me through the glass windows. For a long moment I said nothing. Then I finally spoke. You know what the hardest part of my life was? Neither answered. The divorce wasn't the hardest part. The betrayal wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was sitting alone, in a tiny apartment, believing my life was over. Both remained silent. I continued. Every day I wanted someone to rescue me. Every day I hoped somebody would fix my problems. I looked directly at them, but nobody came. The rivals slowly nodded. And that's what forced me to grow. The room remained silent. I stood and walked toward the window. For a few moments I watched the city below. Then I turned back toward them. I forgive both of you. My ex-wife immediately began crying. The rival closed his eyes. Relief washed across both their faces. But I wasn't finished. I forgive you because carrying anger is too expensive. I forgive you because I refuse to let the past control my future. I paused, then delivered the truth they needed to hear. But forgiveness is not the same thing as giving you access to my life again. Their expressions changed. Not shocked, just disappointed. I cannot rebuild your lives for you. I cannot erase your choices. I cannot save you from consequences. My ex-wife lowered her eyes. The rivals stared at the floor. Then I offered them the only thing I was willing to give. Advice. The same way I rebuilt my life. I paused. Is the same way you'll have to rebuild yours. One honest day at a time. Nobody spoke. Because deep down they knew it was true. There were no shortcuts. No rescue. No miracle. Only work. The same work I had done. A few minutes later they stood to leave. My ex-wife looked at me one final time. There were tears in her eyes. But there was also acceptance. She finally understood that some doors close forever. Not because of hatred. Because life moves forward. The rival extended his hand. I shook it. Then they walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, our eyes met one last time. And then they were gone. I returned to the window overlooking the city. Years earlier I had lost everything. Or at least I thought I had. The truth was much simpler. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost the people who were never meant to remain in my future. The real victory was never becoming wealthy. The real victory was becoming stronger than the pain that once almost destroyed me. And as the sun disappeared behind the skyline, I smiled. Not because they had lost, but because I had finally won the battle within myself. Significant and educational value. This story teaches that loyalty, character, and perseverance are more valuable than appearances, status, or temporary success. The former husband suffered deeply after betrayal, loneliness, and humiliation. Yet he chose growth instead of revenge. His journey shows that pain can become fuel for self-improvement when handled with discipline and purpose. The ex-wife and rival learn that decisions have consequences and that shortcuts often lead to collapse. The story reminds us that true success is built on integrity, resilience, patience, and the ability to forgive without abandoning self-respect. The end.